You've mastered the roar of the GE CT7 engines and the logic of the CTOT system. But then it happens. You're lined up on the numbers. You push the throttles forwards and nothing. The plane barely moves or your yoke feels like it's set in concrete. In Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, the Saab 340 is not just a flight model. It's a living network of cables, fluid and electrons. Today we're moving beyond the brawn of the turboprops to master the secondary systems that actually make this aircraft flyable. If you don't understand the small systems, the big engines won't save you. To fly the Saab 340 professionally, you have to shed the Airbus mindset. There's no fly-by-wire here. The primary flight controls, your ailerons, elevators and rudder, are entirely mechanical. They are connected by a complex web of steel cables and push rods. This gives the Saab its legendary heavy feel in the sim. If you lose all electrical and hydraulic power, you can still steer this airplane. It'll just be a workout. So, what do the hydraulics actually do? The Saab uses a 2100 to 2900 psi system, but it's reserved for the heavy lifting. Which heavy lifting? First of all, the flaps. Those massive barn doors need fluid pressure to fight the wind resistance. Secondly, the landing gear. High pressure actuators handle the cycle. Third, the wheel brakes. This is critical, because no hydraulics simply means no brakes, unless you use the emergency accumulator. Fourth, nose wheel steering. This is why you can't steer with your rudder pedals during a slow taxi unless the hydraulic pump is pressurized. Let's see this in practice. Let's taxi and then switch off the hydraulic pump and see what happens. So we're in the Saab 340 and we're ready for taxiing, but of course I want to first understand where the hydraulic pump can be switched off. And that took me some time, so I of course did some investigation prior to recording this video, and then I figured out it's actually pretty close to the Gust Lock. Here it is, right? Here's where you can find it. Here you can move that lock and then move it to override or switch it to off. There is however another method to kind of demo it, and that's by turning down one of the engines, because turning down one of the engines should also reduce in a PSI decrease, which makes the aircraft harder steerable. Based on what I could figure out, based on what I could find on the internet. If it's 100% correct, I don't know, so let's figure out. So we're gonna remove the parking brakes, and as you can see we need to turn to the left and then directly to the right, but let's first create some more speed, right? So let's try it. Let's also start moving the aircraft. Zooming a little bit out. And then while we're on the straight, I will simply switch off the hydraulic pump. That's what I'm gonna do. You see, everything goes well until now, but let's see what happens if we switch off that hydraulic pump. I do expect weird things to happen. So here we go. So we're gonna remove it and then switch this one to off. And you can see that the aircraft, although I can steer it, it's reacting much slower than initially. Also, of course, you can see the warning lights over here, right? You can see the hydraulics are not happy. Now let me try to brake. Brake is, possible. Yes, it is still possible. Did it go really fast? Oh, I would say I wasn't, too worried about it. The strange thing, however, if I look at these PSIs, right, if I look at the PSI over here and here, you can almost see no drop, because if I switch to on, but you can see almost nothing happens, which is kind of weird from my perspective. So let's see if we can, between brackets, brake the aircraft further. So we're gonna make this one locked, and then we're gonna simply shut down one of the engines, right, because that's the easiest thing to do. Shutting down the engine, right, we simply cut off the fuel completely to one of the engines, and that should reduce in a PSI drop, at least that's what I would expect. Here you again see the pressure is still good for some reason, so that again surprised me, but hey, maybe I'm incorrect. So let's say continue to move. Of course, let's say we're now going much slower, right? Because we can see all kind of alerts about the engine's not correct. Well, that makes sense because we only have one engine. So likely I need to increase the throttle of the remaining engine to go a little bit faster. But also here you can see that I can still move around pretty easy. Now of course we can also go for the maximum, right? Because I'm really curious if we now switch off the hydraulic pump, if that also affects the aircraft massively. And now I must say, you can see I can still steer, but it goes again a little bit slower. I would say it's hard to say, or hard to see of course, because you can't see my joystick. But it feels, I would say, a little bit tough. So if you want to train your muscles, then this is a good method. But of course, I wouldn't recommend to do this during real flight. Of course, it can happen, right? It can happen that one of the engines fails during the takeoff or during, I would say, flying. And that of course can have, I would say, a huge impact on your flight. But even when losing one engine, you can still see that I can control the aircraft, although it requires a little bit more muscle power from the pilot. The Saab 340 is a DC primary aircraft. Two 28-volt starter generators are the heart of the ship. But the real MVP is the Generator Control Unit, also known as the GCU. In Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, the GCU is modeled with high sensitivity. If you try to engage the generators while the engines are still at a very low sub-idle RPM, or if there's a massive voltage spike, the GCU will trip the generator offline to protect the avionics. Pro tips on the bus tie. If you lose one engine and thus one generator, the bus tie will automatically close. This allows the remaining generator to power the entire aircraft. However, in a hot and high airport scenario, this can overload the remaining generator. You'll need to manually shed loads. You need to turn off the right pitot heat or the galley power to keep your flight instruments from flickering. This is the #1 bug report. That isn't actually a bug. It's the Gust Lock. We already discussed it in an earlier episode, but I thought, let's edit it again. Because the Saab's controls are mechanical, a strong gust of wind hitting the tail while the plane is parked can whip the rudder around so hard it snaps the control cables. To prevent this, Saab installed a physical pin. The locked logic. Locked, the yoke and pedals are physically immobilized. The safety interlock. Notice the physical gate on the power levelers. When the Gust Lock is on, you cannot move the throttles past the flight idle gate. This is a mechanical failsafe. The plane literally won't let you attempt to take off if your controls are locked. Let's see how this works in Flight Simulator 2024. So we're in the cockpit of the Saab 340. Let's have a look at the Gust Lock, right? The Gust Lock, you can find it over here, and here you can see it's currently locked, which also prevents us from pushing the throttle further away. But let's have a look at the yoke and all the other things, because you can move them. Well, actually you can't move them, because as you can see, whatever I do, nothing happens, and that's due to the fact that the Gust Lock is, say, locked. If we go outside the aircraft, and let's also do that, we see similar things happening. So let's zoom in a bit. You can see that I can move around while I try, but nothing really happens. Even on, say, rudder, I can't move it. Now let's see if we remove the Gust Lock, because this is super critical. If we remove it, then you will see the aircraft comes to life. First of all, we can move the throttles further, but I'm not going to show that. But you can now also see I can move the yoke. I can do other things also, which means now if I go externally, I can now move the rudder, and I can move the ailerons and the elevators. Super nice. So this is what the Gust Lock prevents, right? If there's now hard wind, it could potentially, I would say, damage the rudder or damage the aileron or damage the elevator. with the Gust Lock, that's something which is prevented. The Saab 340 doesn't have an ICAS screen to tell you what's wrong in plain English. You have to be a detective. Let's break down the big 3 failures that will actually happen to you in the sim. The dual gen electrical emergency. The scenario: you're in heavy icing conditions with all the heaters on and suddenly the master caution switches on. You see that both the L-gen and R-gen buttons are illuminated, which means, okay, we've got a challenge. The cause? You likely exceeded the 1.0 load limit on generators due to the anti-ice overkill. The GCUs have kicked the generators off to prevent the thermal meltdown. What do you need to do? Well, first of all, you need to make sure that you turn off the galley power. Galley power could be any coffee machines, any heaters which are on and are used by the flight attendants. Second, what you need to do, let me go over here. You need to make sure that in this ice protection, you switch off many things. For example, think of switching off the windshield, but also the L pitot and R pitot to avoid them consuming a lot of power. Then go back to the generator section, which you find over here, and then make sure that you're resetting the generator by pressing this button for some time. You will see the other lights are burning, and then switch it to off. Repeat that for both generators. Then keep an eye and watch the volt. Right, the volt should in that case go back to that 28 volt, in this case over here, and then you should be back in business. The second issue, which is not a common issue, but it could happen. Think of this scenario: you're flying off 12,000 feet and then the loud horns are kicking in and you will see some error messages over here. For example, the cabin pressure light is screaming at you. The cause? It could be that you forgot to do something with the bleeder switches, right? The bleeder switches are on the top. You can find them over here. And it could be that you switch them off. Then you might ask, why do you want to switch them off? Well, to do a performance takeoff, to get more thrust. But if you forgot to flip them on, for example at 1000 feet, you aren't pumping any air into the tube. The fix? Well, get some oxygen in your head. Right? That's important. After that, make sure that you switch these, I would say, buttons, both for the left one and for the right one to on. And then look at the cabin VSI. And I believe the meter is over here. Look at this part also to make sure that the cabin repressurizes. If the needle doesn't move, your outflow valve might be stuck open. In that case, then it's time to declare an emergency landing and get down to 10,000 feet. Issue number 3. You're flying on a pretty high altitude and suddenly this light starts to burn. In that case, make sure that you switched on all the ice protection, because else this will happen and you crashed. But luckily Flight Simulator has the option to put you back on the track. But of course, that's not what you want. The Saab 340 is a rocked airplane, but it demands respect for its technical quirks. Mastering the CWP means you aren't just reaching the lights, you're staying ahead of the plane. Now that the hardware and emergencies are handled, it's time to talk digital. In episode 5 we're diving into the UNS-1 FMS. I'll show you how to program a flight plan without losing your mind and how to handle the reverse entry, which is a bug in Flight Simulator 2024. So, see you in the next one.